Boys and girls, welcome back to the Newbie Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and welcome in this hump day, this Wednesday. If you're with us live today or you're watching the live stream, we are doing this on a Wednesday. I hope your week is going so well so far. And we're going to make it a little bit better here in just a second. I'm going to introduce a brand new guest. Before I do, just a couple of quick reminders. If you are live streaming with us today, don't be shy. Jump in, ask questions, comment, get involved in the conversation. It's one of certainly the benefits of a live stream is to get an opportunity to interact with our guests. But then for those of you that are watching this or listening to it after the fact, go find us on Noobie, N-O-O-B-I-E podcast on Instagram. Follow us and keep up to date with the upcoming live stream schedule. Come be part of the live stream and the live session so that you can get involved in these conversations. Would really love more involvement, and I look forward to seeing you there or here at that point. And then one last note too, I just want to mention for those of you that aren't aware, we have a Newbie conference, Newbie Photographer Conference coming up on January 10th and 11th, 2023 here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. If you have not registered yet, that registration deadline is coming up on December 1st. So make sure that you go to NOOBIE, newbieconference.com, and get registered and come join us for a really, really great educational experience. All right. On that note, I want to introduce a brand new guest to the Newbie Photographer Podcast. Speaking of educational experience, David Molnar is here. David, thanks for being willing to do this show today. I know you got a lot going on these days, but I appreciate your involvement here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. That Newbie Photography Conference sounds really awesome. Like it's going to help a lot of people.
I hope so. And I certainly think so from my end. We're trying to put something on that's a little bit unusual to the industry and the approach to the educational process. And so I'm excited to bring that to the conference. And again, for those of you listening in, don't be shy. Go check it out, newbieconference.com. You can get more details there. David, we've been doing a series here on the podcast called I Wish I Knew. And essentially what I'm doing is just asking experienced, established photographers to come on the show and share a big idea or principle that they wish they had realized or knew more about when they first got started. And I wonder what that big idea might be for you.
You know, that's a great question. And there's a lot of things that I wish I knew when I was starting out. I started listening to around 21 years old, like 2 or 3 years ago for me. I started my photography professional career, or I attempted to, I should say. And I was listening to like Earl Nightingale, his like talk on The Strangest Secret, and I was reading Napoleon Hill, and all of these, mentors that I was listening to and reading at the time were essentially saying, if you want to be great at something, like if you want to pursue, if you want to achieve great results, then you need to go 190% all in. And they said it much more eloquently than that. But
Okay.
they were essentially conveying that you need to go 190% all in and give it everything you've got, and have a definiteness of purpose. And so at the time I was trying to figure out, I'm listening to these, wise, brilliant, successful, mentors of mine. And I'm thinking, okay, so whatever type of photography that I decide to pursue, I need to be all in for the rest of my life. That's what I was thinking at the time, because that's what these books and that's what these, wise people were saying. And I think that's a really important and a really valuable lesson to learn, that you need to go all in and really pour everything you possibly have, and don't half-a something, don't step your toes in lightly. You really do kind of have to burn the ships and really go all in order for people to think, to essentially want to hitch your wagons to you. But there was a really interesting thing that I learned, and I'm going to get a little bit spiritual. I'm a believer. And
Sure.
so there was a moment, hopefully this is okay, and if it's not okay, then forget you guys. No, I'm just kidding.
No, absolutely. Go for it.
Yeah, but there was this moment where I was engaged to be married, and I told my fiance at the time, hey, I'm gonna take the rest of the money I have in savings, and I'm gonna spend it on this 2-month road trip, and I'm going to drive around Mexico. Don't worry, the drug cartel isn't super active right now. And I'm going to blow the rest of my savings, spend a bunch of money on the credit card, and camp on the beach every day, spearfish for dinner, and surf as much as possible on this 2-month trip while you work and plan the rest of the wedding. Is that cool, fiance? And I don't know. I honestly have no idea how Tammy, my wife, ended up, my then fiance ended up staying with me. But on this trip, I had a freak out moment, Nathan. I had this moment where, like I said, I'm listening to these mentors that say you need to have a definiteness of purpose. Like you need to go 190% all in. And I agree with that. But there was this moment where I am wrestling with God. Like I said, I'm a believer. And I'm like praying / yelling like on the beach somewhere a couple 1,000 miles south in Mexico.
Sure.
And I'm like, how the heck am I going to support my growing family? My fiance, soon to be wife. How am I going to support her? Because I don't have a real job. I want to be a photographer, but I don't know what to do next. And here's the thing. I wanted to be an album cover photographer. I wanted to photograph celebrities and do advertising campaigns and high-end studio photo shoots and all those things. And I'm wrestling with God on the beach, mentally. And he told me, shoot weddings. And there's nothing wrong with weddings. I just had my heart set on something else. And I'm thinking at this moment, but I have to have a definiteness of purpose. I have to go 190% all in a specific direction. And my heart isn't in weddings. I want to shoot album covers. And what God told me on the beach that day was, yes, it is true that you need to go all in, that you need to have a definiteness of purpose and direction in your life if you want to be great. Because I felt like I had greatness. I know that sounds pretentious, but I felt like I was destined for great things. My parents told me I could be anything I wanted to be when I grew up, and I believed them naively or wisely. I don't know. And what God told me on the beach that day, and this is like the clearest I've ever heard him. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was clear inside. He said, yes, it's true. You need to have a definiteness of purpose and give it 190%. But what you didn't hear from those wise mentors, what you haven't understood yet, is that you can do some of this, you can give 190% in a season of your life and then pivot your direction. He told me, I want you to give me 5 years and give it everything you've got and shoot weddings, and I will fulfill dreams and desires you don't even know you have. And he's like, and then after that 5 years, you can pivot towards the next direction that you want to pursue.
Okay.
And so yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to jump in. I'm thinking about, because you're right about the importance of clarity, but you're also right, and I think you're essentially alluding to this, but a lot of photographers, I think, deal with that kind of deer in the headlights. Oh, shoot, I realize I need to have clarity. I need to establish some type of direction. But then there's also that sense of overwhelm, which is, how do I pick that direction?
Yeah. And is it a viable career path? I was
Right.
at the precipice of, I have to support my family. Getting a real job wasn't an option for me. Like, I just couldn't stomach that idea,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, then you said, okay, fine, wedding photography it is. I'm going to make this move. I'm going to pick a direction, and that seems to be the right direction to go at this point. And this was how many years ago again?
This was like 17 years ago.
Okay. So that's
Yeah.
a pretty big leap to make when you had internally anyway, set kind of in your mind that, hey, you know what? I want to be an album cover photographer, which is very, very specific, very niche. And it's a tough part of the industry to get into as well.
That's right. Yeah.
And yet you get this message, okay, you know what? Wedding photography actually is the direction I need to start in. So where did you go from that point? Because I can imagine maybe there was some sense of reassurance that you're getting this message that this is the way you should go, but yet some question marks left in your mind as well.
Yeah. So, when we're talking about newbie photographers maybe have this deer in the headlights of, I don't know which path I should pursue. And there are different there are more viable career paths than others. So for instance, wedding photography is a more viable career path to make good money in, just because there is a market for it. Family portraiture is another really viable career path, real estate photography, et cetera. Right. But, album cover photography I would learn later is a very niche thing and a hard path to pursue and make a living at.
Right.
But when God said that, give me 5 years and I'll fulfill dreams that you don't even know that you have, he actually really did show up. We ended up booking a wedding with a friend like shortly after that, and then booked 8 more weddings that year. I poured my heart into it. I had like tear sheets of magazines, and I'm like holding them up and being like, no, pose this way at that first wedding. I poured everything into it.
Yeah.
And then by that second year, we booked, I think, 20 something weddings, and we're making 6 figures. Like it was mind blowing. Like when I put 190% effort into the direction in a viable career path, how rewarding it was. I think the following summer I was shooting weddings in Greece. The year after that was like Switzerland, and of course we were all over the United States traveling as a destination wedding and husband and wife wedding photography team. But what was interesting is that 5 years later, my wife transitioned out of her day job and was joining me full time, and we were taking this sabbatical in Hawaii, and which was an amazing 2-month winter off in Hawaii. And there was this moment where I realized, holy crap, it's been 5 years to the month that God told me to shoot weddings. And I felt this release in my soul of saying hey, you've been faithful. And, we paid off all of our debt. And it was a wonderful, it was a wonderful blessing. We got to travel, got to have fun, built my photography equipment, built my experience, built our connections, paid off debt, and was able to have my wife transition out of her day job. And then on this sabbatical, this 2-month sabbatical, God was like, now you can pursue your dream of shooting album covers. And it was just oh my gosh, it was pretty incredible. And then, it's a whole other story, but my career as an album cover photographer really took off, and I saw my original dream really come to fruition. So what's interesting here, though, is that if I had tried to jump straight into the album cover photography niche in Nashville, I would have gotten eaten alive. I didn't have the experience, the equipment, the connections, the wisdom to pursue that pretty intense industry. And I would have I believe I would have failed and not achieved that dream had I just tried to go straight for that niche that was hard to make a living in.
So would you say, and I appreciate you also sharing to your perspective coming from a place of faith, but of course not everybody listening and or watching is necessarily going to be able to relate to that. There is one kind of big idea though that is, I think, relevant to everyone, which is the notion of taking a step, some type of step, right? That's the thing here is there is that deer in the headlights experience of, oh shoot, okay, I need to make a move, but I don't know which one is the quote unquote right move to make here. And you had some sense of direction that you were able to take a step in the direction of. But what does the photographer who literally has no point of reference, maybe they have a big dream like you talked about with the album cover photography, but they don't know what that first step even looks like. Practically speaking, how did they make a move, even take that first step?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And there is there's some big picture ways to try to hone in on what you should do as a photographer. But there's this analogy that I like to tell, and it relates to a plane. Like if a plane is going to fly from New York to LA, then rarely is the runway actually pointing at the West Coast, or specifically at Los Angeles, okay? The plane has to actually take off, gain that momentum, get that airspeed, gain enough altitude experience, right? And then pivot its direction to aim towards its ultimate destination, which is Los Angeles, okay? There is a lot to unpack there, but as a photographer, a lot of times as a newbie photographer, you don't know what you want to shoot. I was fortunate that I knew that I wanted to shoot album covers, okay? But a lot of people are like, I don't know, I like shooting landscapes, and I like shooting birds, and I like shooting, senior portraits, and they're not really sure, and they're kind of all over the place, and maybe I could shoot, motocross, and, they don't necessarily know. What I would suggest is dive in, go to this newbie photography conference, because that sounds amazing. Learn the foundations of photography, dive in and start, getting momentum and airspeed and actually taking off, okay? And once you gain that experience, once you gain that foundational, once you start gaining that confidence that you can take amazing, images, then you can start pivoting right? Your direction, and try to aim for the ultimate destination that you want to go. So don't get so held up on like, oh my gosh, I have to learn how to shoot, high-end fashion portraits right away. Like, no, you actually just need to learn how to control your camera first and learn how to shoot in manual mode and maybe learn some lighting techniques before you worry about, shooting fashion models on the runway in New York and how to get booked and how to, build your business and all those things. Like, take that first step, okay? Which is essentially like get the plane on the runway and start doing what you can to gain momentum. You can pivot later. That's the beauty of photography, is the experience that you have gained over time. And the wisdom, the equipment, the connections, they will pay dividends later, even if you switch career paths. What I'm not saying is switch career paths every couple minutes, but start gaining that momentum and that experience, and you can always pivot your direction later.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot better than the analogy that I tend to go to, which is the jump and then build your wings on the way down, because that particular analogy involves crashing if you don't get those wings built. So I like this kind of direction for the conversation a little bit better. And it kind of takes me to, it's a phrase that I use quite a bit engaging with photographers, which is a big picture view. So we're using this airplane analogy, as we take off and we begin to gain altitude, as you described, it enables us to it enables us to develop a perspective which is a bit unique, right? We're able to see the landscape at large, as opposed to just being stuck on that runway trying to figure out how to take off. And at that point, it allows us to develop perspective, to make intelligent decisions, particularly within the marketplace, based on market behavior, about which direction to go. And I'm curious to ask you this here before we finish up about that, because a lot of photographers, I don't know, they create this sense of this magical, mystical experience around the idea of choosing the photography or the direction they're going to go with their photography business. I tend to look at it a little bit more pragmatically, just simply looking at opportunity in the market and making a decision based on that, coupled with my financial goals. I know that's a bit pragmatic and maybe simplistic for a lot of photographers who are looking at this from an artist perspective, but where do you think the balance is between those two things?
I think that's a great question. I think that you have to be a little bit pragmatic about it. A lot of artists and photographers have their heads in the clouds a little bit, and I kind of skew both lines. I can go very artsy, and I can also go very business and spreadsheets. I kind of can straddle both. But from a pragmatic, practical standpoint, there are more viable career paths than others, okay? Being a landscape photographer, as fun as it sounds, I only know a few successful ones that actually make a six-figure full-time living from it. It's a really hard niche career path that is tricky to make a full-time living. I know a crap ton of successful wedding photographers. I know a bunch of successful real estate photographers. I know a bunch of successful family portrait photographers. On 30A in Florida, Panhandle, where I live, I mean, these photographers are making, $1,000 to $3,000 for the 30-minute sunset portrait session that they do each night.
Wow.
I mean, there are more viable career paths to make a full-time living than trying to just shoot birds and selling your bird pictures, at the craft fair on the weekends. Like, there are ways that you can be more practical and intentional on making a full-time living and providing for your family. Also, it's okay to make money from photography and provide for your family. Like, it doesn't have to be just art. But right. if it's a lot of photographers, and myself included, have used photography as a form of therapy and a form of just for me and for my artistic pleasure. And that's fine too. Your motivations may vary. But from a very practical, pragmatic standpoint, do you want to shoot people or do you want to shoot things? Okay. And then that's two real big, easy questions you can answer. Do I hate people or do I like people? No, but I mean, in all seriousness, do you want to shoot people or do you not? Because if you don't and then the second question is, do I want to make money or not? And the third question is, how much money do I want to make if I do want to make money? And so a simple illustration would be okay, I don't want to shoot people. There's a lot of people that fall in that category. I don't want to shoot portraits. It's not my thing. I just like shooting landscapes. Okay, but do you want to make money? And they're like, yes. Okay, take your passion for landscape photography and, exposing the skies perfectly and creating that drama, and translate it into, for example, real estate photography. That is not shooting people, it's shooting things. And you're taking the same skill set that you would use for landscapes and craft beautiful scenery and use it in real estate photography. If you love shooting birds and wildlife and, things like that, you love, still, like essentially still life or whatever, you might be able to, this is kind of a stretch, but you might be able to pivot, your love for that non-people photography towards something like photographing food, for restaurants and magazines and influencers on, Instagram, or, shooting product photography. There's tons and tons of businesses that actually need and are willing to pay for that sort of content. So it's asking, do I want to shoot people? Do I want to shoot things? Do I want to make money? Do I not want to make money? And then finally, how much money do I want to make if I did want to make money? And that can help point you towards a viable career path. And I'm sure you guys can give more advice at your newbie photography concert on that. Conference, sorry, not concert.
we can make it a concert too, yeah. No, but I like that. I like that because I think a lot of times, especially new photographers, it's easy to get on Instagram and scroll and be like, oh, I love this, I want to do that, but when it comes to actually, putting the pedal to the metal, actually getting started, right? I understandably, it can be difficult to pick an individual direction. So I love these practical, very pragmatic suggestions that you've made. Will help, I think, kind of narrow the focus down to the photographer. And then at some point, to your original story, you got to make that decision. You got to make a move in a particular direction. The cool thing is, it'll enable you to develop a skill set, which you could potentially leverage doing something else down the road. The key is ultimately taking that leap, getting started.
That's right. 100%.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love this very simple and yet practical advice for new photographers. And David, before we go here real quick, I just want to give you an opportunity to share a bit of what it is that you do. We kind of should have started this way, I guess, in the traditional format, doing an introduction, but share a little bit about your brand and ultimately the education, the mentorship that you offer through your community, if you will.
Yeah, I position myself as David Molnar, your photography mentor, because I love helping people, pursue their photography dreams. And most recently, I wrote a book that I'm really, really proud of called Learning to See. In this book, the subtitle is A Photographer's Guide from Zero to Your First Paid Gigs. But this book is for anyone who's interested in photography, whether or not they want to pursue it for passion or for profit. And a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in this podcast episode, I kind of walk through practically how to pursue the photography dream that you have, whether it is for making money or just for the passion and for the love of it. So you can check out that book, Learning to See, everywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, anywhere, and then you can find out more, about it.
Yeah, and I'll say, as I pull this up on screen here too, and we'll link to this in the show notes for everybody listening in at newbiepodcast.com, the link to the Amazon, or to the book on Amazon, I should say. I had the opportunity, David sent me a copy, and I had the opportunity to go through the book. And I told David this on the phone the other day, just so nobody thinks I'm blowing smoke here, but I really love the layout, the simplicity in the layout and design of the book. It honestly, and I said this to David as well, it's surprising in 2022 to think about learning photography through a book, but this was actually quite refreshing as I go through it. A lot of times, David, and you've probably seen this being in education as well, the information being presented is being presented in a way that's so busy that it's distracting. I mean, a lot of conferences I go to, it's this way. A photographer gets up on stage, they throw these slides together that have paragraphs of text and too many images. And what photographers do, they've got their phone out and they're just taking a picture because they can't take it in all at once. It's not a great educational experience. The way that your book is laid out is it's designed in such a way that it's very easy to look at the information being presented, both the combination of the picture and the technical information, kind of put two and two together and easily make sense of it versus some of these kind of confusing, convoluted educational experiences out there. So props to you for that. And again, I know I already said that to you, but for everybody listening and watching, we will link to this book because it is one that I recommend. And then the other thing too, and I'll just pull this up real quick, David, mentioning your website, David Molnar, DavidMolnar.com, on screen here for everybody listening in. You can learn more about David's brand and the community, the education that he offers through that brand as well. We'll link to this, of course, in the show notes at newbiepodcast.com. David, thank you for making time. I know it's a quick, short episode, but you brought a lot of practical, kind of helpful, applicable information for new photographers. I appreciate that. And thanks everybody for listening in, for watching as well. Have an absolutely lovely day.